But anyway, on to the sermon. You may have noticed that there's going to be a general election come November. Historic election. One of the candidates is the first woman ever nominated to be President of the United States. The other has never been elected to anything. We live in a polarized country. More polarized than I can remember at any time in my life. We are, in fact, so polarized that I'm pretty sure that it doesn't matter who gets elected. It's going to be tough to get Congress to go along with anything. I hold my breath and tremble in fear. So I decided what I'd like to do this morning is tell you how to vote in November. I would point out to you that I said I want to tell you how to vote, not who to vote for. My thoughts begin with a pretty obscure little Bible story out of 1 Samuel. I think that's wrong. Yes, 1 Samuel, chapter 8. Up to that point, the Jews had operated under the leadership of judges. These were leaders who arose when there was a need. Gideon or Deborah. And then, when the need was over, they would go back to life as it had been, and the Jews would operate under a tribal system. But finally, they come to their prophet, to Samuel, and say, you know what? We really want a king. We want a king like all of the other nations around us. So Samuel told the people who were asking for a king what the Lord had said. And notice how things have not changed at all. If you have a king, this is how he's going to treat you. He will force your sons to join his army. Some of them will ride in his chariot, some will serve in the cavalry, and others will run ahead of his own chariot. Some of them will be officers in charge of 1,000 soldiers, and others will be in charge of 50. Still others will have to farm the king's land and harvest his crops, or make weapons and parts for his chariots. Your daughters will have to make perfume, or do his cooking and baking. The king will take your best fields, as well as your vineyards and olive orchards, and give them to his own officials. He will also take 1/10 of your grain and grapes and give it to his officers and officials. The king will take your slaves and your best young men and your donkeys and make them do his work. He will also take 1/10 of your sheep and goats. You will become the king's slaves. And you will finally cry out for the Lord to save you from the king that you wanted. But the Lord won't answer your prayers. The people would not listen. No, they said, we want to be like other nations. We want a king to rule us and lead us in battle. Samuel listened to them and then told the Lord exactly what they had said. Do what they want, the Lord answered. Give them a king. Samuel told the people to go back to their homes. Isn't that an interesting exchange between the two? Samuel told them, now you're going to regret this. You're going to regret having a king. And in response, they said, we want one anyway. And Saul was a terrible king. And this is parenthetical. Saul was chosen because he was tall, good-looking, and a pretty good fighter. And it's amazing to me how we still do that. It's amazing to me how our political candidates, during their debates, all want to somehow look taller than the others. It's amazing to me how we look at political candidates as if they were the Messiah, that they were going to come and fix all of our problems, and never do. This is parenthetically parenthetical. It's amazing to me how churches do that. If only we could find a good preacher, that would solve all of our problems. It never does. Of course, it doesn't help, going back to politicians, that our politicians promise us everything. More benefits, lower taxes, world peace. More than anyone could ever deliver. We somehow never get the idea that the world's problems are ours to solve and won't be fixed for us. But back to Samuel. It's interesting to me that the Jews saw a king as a necessary evil. They didn't really like all the implications of having a king and all it was going to cost them. But they understood that a king was going to get them organized enough to fight off the surrounding tribes, so they needed one, even though they were going to regret it. A necessary evil. You ever feel that way about our political system? Yeah, I suppose. None of us really like laws or taxes or all that governments mean. But we do like schools and police and fire departments and armies that protect us. We like at least some of the things that government brings to us, even if we don't like all of it. We're stuck between our dislike of the government and our need for it. We're stuck. A necessary evil. You know that about 30% of us in the United States find politics to be so objectionable that we will not vote. It is such dirty business that we don't want anything to do with it. We understand why. It is dirty business in which those who were elected to serve us end up being more concerned about their next election than about our lives. Several years ago, I read a book by John Danforth called Faith and Politics. John Danforth was the senator from Missouri, heir to the Ralston-Purina fortune, and also an Episcopal priest, who remarked in this book that he believed that the role of the church generally, and Christians specifically, was to be the conscience of the government. The conscience of the government. He didn't believe that the church should ever expect the support of the government, the help of the government. He didn't think that we should ever expect that the government was going to completely reflect our values. No. We are to be the conscience of the government. Now, isn't that an interesting assumption? He assumed that government needs a conscience because it's lost its own. But think about it. Isn't that right? Power is the most amazing thing. It's so demanding, so attractive, so powerful that you and I will do anything to hang on to it, to use it. Power is like that. Power is so powerful that it can make us lose our moral compass. I remember hearing an interview with Judith Exner, who was the mistress to John Kennedy, who remarked that, in her opinion, the whole Kennedy family had so much power that they had come to assume that the rules did not apply to them. That's what power will do, isn't it? That's why government needs a conscience. Reverend John Bennett preceded me in the pulpit at First Christian Church in Lebanon, Missouri. He was just stood trial in Kansas City for disrupting the Missouri Senate. It seems that he and 22 of his colleagues stood in the balcony to the Senate in the gallery, and they sang songs and waved signs and would not be quiet. The Missouri Senate was in the midst of voting down an expansion to Medicare that would have provided health insurance for thousands of Missourians. The Missouri Senate, because of where it came from, was going to vote against the expansion to Medicare. And they stood in the gallery reminding those politicians that all people are deserving of dignity and that health care is a human right. He'll pay the price for serving as a conscience to the government. Hey, how many of you have seen iCitizen for your phone? Well, I can see how popular that one is. iCitizen is an app for your iPhone or your Android device, or you can access it on icitizen.org. And it's an app that keeps you informed about political doings and comings and goings, and it also provides a really easy link to your elected officials so that you can let them know what you think. Wow. Maybe we all ought to have it on our phones so that we can help our government keep its moral compass, so that they might remember that it's about the people, so that they might remember that it's about justice and peace. But see, I told you I was going to tell you how to vote. So here we go. To begin with, there is nowhere in the Bible that addresses the subject of individual human rights. Nowhere. You know what the Bible is about individual human responsibilities. The Bible doesn't tell us how others are supposed to treat us. The Bible tells us how we're to treat others. Love God. Love your neighbor as yourself. And you know why that is. Part of it is because at the time the Bible was written, the concept of basic human rights had not yet been invented. We had not evolved to that point that we thought people had inherent rights. And the other thing is that we hardly need any encouragement, do we, to think about our own individual rights and needs. It was Richard Dawkins who wrote the book, The Selfish Gene, which says that at our core, we are all selfish. We are all geared to think first about ourselves. We are all geared to think about self-preservation. We don't need any help to be selfish. You know, capitalism is the most successful economic system that's ever been invented. I believe every nation should be capitalistic. But am I the only person that's ever noticed that the engine that drives capitalism is self-interest? It's in self-interest. Well, let me say it this way. You know, Adam Smith talked about the great invisible hand that operated in capitalism. There's nothing invisible about the hand. It's about self-interest. And we don't need any help doing it. We can all be self-interested all by ourselves. But then along comes Jesus, who says, stop thinking about yourself all the time and love God and love your neighbor. Along comes Jesus, who says, you know what? Care about the people that nobody else cares about. Jesus, over and over and over, calls us to swim upstream from our basic human nature, to stop being so self-interested and to be more concerned about others, to be more interested in the common good. The common good. That's our call, is to question what's best for all of us, especially those on the fringes. What's best for all of us? Isaiah 58 has long been an important scripture for me. In light of our conversation this morning, listen to these words. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. But they say, why do we fast, but you don't see? Why humble ourselves, but you don't notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? I sit to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes. Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to God, to the Lord? Is not this the fast I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You know, nowhere in the Bible are we called to be self-centered. The Bible calls us to think over and over again about the common good. And I got to tell you, it's much easier to vote self-interest. More taxes? I don't want to pay more taxes. It's harder to vote for the common good, in part because it's not always easy to know what really is to the common good. But there's our challenge, to be educated enough and to be concerned enough that we really want to know what's in the common good. Here's what I think. Because we are Christian, we must vote. We cannot opt out of the system Our calling is to be the moral conscience to government, and voting is our first voice. Second of all, when we vote for the common good. Not our own self-interest, which will always be our first instinct. We vote for the common good, asking what is best for all concerned, especially those on the margins of society. That's how to vote in November. Would you pray with me? God, we realize that politics really is an ugly business. There is a part of us all that wishes we could go live on another planet for the next 3 months. But we can't. You call us to be involved and engaged in your world. Help us to know what's best. In the name of Christ. Amen.